My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 33 years old. 3 months ago, my mother-in-law secretly DNA tested my 5-year-old son because she was convinced he did not belong to her family. She thought the results would prove I had betrayed my husband. Instead, those results uncovered a hospital mistake buried for 31 years. A mistake so devastating it shattered 2 families in a single night. But here is the part nobody knew when that envelope appeared at our dining room table. I had already discovered the truth 6 days earlier, and what I chose to do with those 6 days changed every life connected to that test forever. Before I take you back to the beginning, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and what time it is there right now. I always read those. Now let me take you back 8 years to the day I first met Diane Whitmore. I was 25 years old. My husband, Nathan, had been dating me for 6 months when he invited me to his parents' lake house outside Traverse City, Michigan. It was late September, the kind of cold northern Michigan weekend where the trees look unreal, all orange and red and gold against dark water. Diane opened the front door wearing a cream sweater and a smile that never reached her eyes. She hugged Nathan tightly, kissed his cheek, then turned to me with a polite expression that felt practiced. "So this is Evelyn," she said, like she was confirming information from a file. Her husband Richard shook my hand warmly. He had rough carpenter hands and tired blue eyes. Nathan's younger sister, Melanie, sat in the kitchen scrolling on her phone and barely looked up when we walked in. Dinner that night was roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and 20 quiet evaluations disguised as conversation. Diane asked where I went to school, what my parents did, how much student debt I still had from grad school, whether I planned to continue working after marriage someday. She never asked any of those questions directly. She threaded them carefully into normal conversation, the way a lawyer builds a case without letting the witness realize it. "Your mother was a waitress?" Diane asked lightly while pouring wine. "For a while," I answered. "Before she became a dental assistant." Diane nodded slowly. "That must have been difficult financially." I remember glancing at Nathan, expecting him to notice the tone beneath her words, but he only smiled and said, "Mum worries about everybody." Later that night, while Nathan slept beside me upstairs, I stood at the guest room window looking out at the dark lake and thinking something I could not yet explain. Diane Whitmore was the kind of woman who categorized people immediately. Valuable or useless, permanent or temporary, safe or threatening. I had been placed into a category before dinner was even served. Nathan and I married the following summer in Chicago. Small ceremony, 80 guests. Outdoor reception beside Lake Michigan. My mother cried during the vows. Diane did not cry at all. She watched the ceremony with the expression of someone inspecting structural integrity in a building she did not entirely trust. During the reception, she made a toast. "Nathan has always had a generous heart," she said, smiling at the crowd. "Sometimes too generous." People laughed politely. I smiled too, though I felt the comment land exactly where she intended it to. The first 2 years of marriage were mostly peaceful. Nathan worked as a civil engineer. I worked as a pediatric speech therapist at a rehabilitation clinic downtown. We bought a small brick house in Evanston with creaky hardwood floors and a backyard barely big enough for a grill. Diane lived 40 minutes away in Naperville, which somehow still felt too close. She visited often, always announced, but never really invited. She criticized little things at first. The curtains, the paint color in our kitchen, the fact that we ordered takeout twice in 1 week. "You know Nathan loves home-cooked meals," she would say while standing in my kitchen reorganizing cabinets. I had already organized myself. Nathan always defended her the same way. "She means well." That phrase became wallpaper in our marriage. Present everywhere. ignored because it was always there. Our son, Oliver, was born 3 years later on a stormy April morning. 7 pounds, 11 ounces, with thick dark hair and huge grey eyes. Nathan cried the second he held him. Diane arrived at the hospital 4 hours later, carrying flowers and enough opinions for 3 people. But when she looked at Oliver, something softened in her face. "He looks exactly like Nathan did," she whispered. And for a little while, things got easier. The first year after Oliver's birth was almost happy in the uncomplicated way early parenthood sometimes tricks you into believing life will stay. Diane babysat occasionally. Richard built Oliver a wooden rocking horse by hand. Nathan seemed lighter than I had ever seen him. Then, shortly after Oliver's 2nd birthday, his appearance began changing. His hair, once almost black, started turning pale blonde during the summer. By age 3, it was bright gold. His eyes shifted from grey to green. Strangers constantly commented on it. Where did that colouring come from? Cashiers would ask. "He looks Scandinavian," neighbours said. I thought nothing of it. My biological father, who left when I was 8, had blonde hair and green eyes. Genetics are strange sometimes. But Diane noticed. And once Diane noticed something, she treated it like a loose thread she could not stop pulling. The first comment came during Thanksgiving dinner. Oliver sat in a high chair smashing sweet potatoes with both hands while everyone laughed. Diane watched him quietly for a long moment before saying, "It's funny. There hasn't been blonde hair in the Whitmore family for generations." The room went still for half a second, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Richard cleared his throat. Nathan kept eating. Melanie glanced down at her wine glass. I smiled politely and explained about my father's side of the family. Diane nodded. "Interesting," she said softly. It was the same way some people say unfortunate. After that, the comments multiplied slowly, carefully, almost scientifically. "Oliver doesn't really resemble Nathan anymore. His features are so unusual for your side. Are you sure your father's family was actually Irish? Always smiling. Always casual. Never enough to openly challenge. Just enough to plant doubt like seeds." I started documenting them in the Notes app on my phone. Date. Comment. Context. Professional habit. Speech therapists document patterns constantly. Behavioral shifts. Language regressions. Emotional triggers. You learn quickly that people reveal themselves through repetition. By the time Oliver turned 5, I had logged 27 separate comments related to his appearance. 27. Nathan noticed some of them but dismissed them every time. "Mom's just old-fashioned. She's obsessed with family traits. You know how she is." I did know how she was. That was the problem. The worst part was how the suspicions spread through the extended family without anyone directly saying it aloud. Cousin Andrea stopped making jokes with me during family parties. Melanie started posting strange comments under photos of Oliver online. Such unique colouring. Still can't believe those green eyes. Smiley face emojis at the end like camouflage. Richard remained kind to me, but quieter around Diane, as if he sensed something building and hoped silence might prevent impact. It did not. The incident that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday in February. Nathan had flown to Denver for work. My clinic stayed late because one of my patients, a 6-year-old girl recovering from traumatic brain injury, had a breakthrough session and I refused to cut it short. Diane offered to pick Oliver up from kindergarten. I hesitated, then agreed. When I arrived at Diane's house around 6:30, Oliver ran toward me holding a juice box and talking excitedly about dinosaurs. Diane stood near the kitchen island wiping counters that were already clean. "He had a good afternoon," she said. Something in her voice felt overly controlled. On the counter beside her sat a small white cardboard box. Plain, unmarked except for a tiny barcode sticker. When she noticed me looking at it, she slid it casually into a drawer. "Just vitamins," she said too quickly. I nodded like I believed her. But later that night, while helping Oliver brush his teeth, I noticed something else. A small red mark inside his cheek. "Did you bite yourself, buddy?" I asked. He shook his head. Grandma used a Q-tip in my mouth. My stomach tightened instantly. "Why?" She said it was for a science game. I stared at my son in the bathroom mirror. Blonde hair. Green eyes. Missing front tooth. Completely innocent trust. Something cold moved through my chest. The next morning, I called a family law attorney during my lunch break. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. Calm voice. Sharp mind. I explained everything. The comments. The tension. The Q-tip. Rebecca became very quiet. "If your mother-in-law collected a DNA sample from your child without parental consent," she said carefully, "she may have violated multiple privacy laws depending on how she used it. Can she legally test him? Not without authorization from a parent or guardian." I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel while snow fell outside the windshield in thick, silent sheets. "What should I do?" I asked. Rebecca paused. "Right now? Nothing. Wait. Wait for what? For her to reveal what she believes she found." I hated that answer. But she was right. People determined to expose others rarely stop halfway through the performance. Diane would not either. 3 days later, the phone call came. "Mrs. Carter?" a woman asked. "This is Melissa from Genexa Diagnostics. We are contacting you regarding a submitted familial DNA analysis involving your minor child, Oliver Carter." My pulse started pounding immediately. I did not authorize any testing. The submission form lists Diane Whitmore as the requesting party and indicates parental authorization was obtained. Rebecca had been right. Diane forged consent. "Cancel the test," I said instantly. "Unfortunately, the analysis has already been completed." "What?" "The results were released to the requesting party yesterday." I closed my eyes. "Too late. Can you tell me what the results were?" Silence. "Mrs. Carter, legally I cannot disclose detailed information without proper verification, but I can confirm this was not a standard paternity issue." My heartbeat slowed strangely. "What does that mean?" The report indicated unexpected biological inconsistencies requiring expanded familial analysis. I sat frozen. "I don't understand." "I'm very sorry," the woman said gently. "You may want to speak with your family directly." Then she hung up. That night, I watched Nathan helping Oliver build Lego towers on the living room rug while my mind spun in circles. Biological inconsistencies. Expanded familial analysis. None of it made sense. Oliver was Nathan's son. I had never been unfaithful. There was nothing to uncover, unless the test uncovered something else entirely. That possibility settled into me slowly like poison. 2 days later, Melanie accidentally confirmed my fear. I stopped by Diane's house to pick up a casserole dish I had forgotten there after Sunday dinner. Melanie answered the door holding her phone. "Mom's out," she said distractedly. I walked toward the kitchen. Melanie followed behind me, still texting rapidly. Then her phone buzzed and she laughed under her breath. "Saturday dinner is going to be insane," she muttered. I stopped moving. "What?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Nothing. Melanie," she hesitated. "Mom invited everybody over Saturday night. She says once Nathan sees the DNA report, everything changes." My stomach dropped so hard it physically hurt. What exactly does she think the report says? Melanie crossed her arms. You know what she thinks? No, I said quietly. I really don't. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Melanie's face. Tiny. Fast. Then she looked away. I shouldn't have said anything. I drove home barely remembering the route. Saturday. Public confrontation. Family audience. Diane had planned an execution. What she did not realize was that she misunderstood the evidence entirely. That night, after Nathan fell asleep, I logged onto the online portal for Genexa Diagnostics using information Rebecca helped me legally obtain through emergency parental access authorization. I expected paternity percentages. Instead, I found chaos. The report confirmed Nathan was not biologically related to Oliver. But the second section changed everything. Probability of maternity match between Evelyn Carter and Oliver Carter. 0%. I stared at the screen so long my vision blurred. Then I read it again. 0%. Impossible. My hands began shaking violently. The report continued with an extended kinship analysis. Nathan and Oliver shared no biological connection. I shared no biological connection. Yet, Oliver's profile showed a close maternal relationship match to a woman named Claire Bennett, age 31, residing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My entire body went numb. There are moments in life when reality fractures so completely your brain refuses to process it all at once. This was one of those moments. I kept reading. Claire Bennett had submitted DNA through a genealogy service 18 months earlier. The system flagged a likely maternal-child relationship, which meant one thing so horrifying my mind initially rejected it. Oliver had been switched at birth. I covered my mouth with both hands to stop myself from making noise and waking Nathan. My son, my beautiful little boy, asleep down the hall with dinosaur sheets and blonde hair and green eyes, and a tiny scar above his eyebrow from falling off a scooter last summer. Not biologically mine. Not biologically Nathan's. Somewhere else in America, another child existed. Our biological child. Breathing. Sleeping. Laughing. Living an entirely different life. I barely slept that night. By morning, I had contacted Rebecca again. She arranged an emergency consultation with a medical malpractice attorney named Daniel Price. We met Friday afternoon in a downtown office overlooking frozen grey streets. I handed him printed copies of the report. He read silently for several minutes. Jesus Christ, he whispered eventually. This is real. I think so. Daniel leaned back heavily in his chair. If this is accurate, the hospital made a catastrophic identification error during postnatal transfer. How does something like this happen? Rarely, he said honestly. But it happens. I stared at the skyline outside his office window. What do I do? Daniel answered carefully. Legally, you verify everything immediately through independent testing. Emotionally? He paused. I don't know if there's a correct answer for this. I thought about Oliver calling me mommy for 5 years. About bedtime stories. Fevers. First words. The way he grabbed my hand crossing parking lots. Biology suddenly felt both massively important and completely irrelevant at the same time. There's another family, I whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Rebecca joined us 20 minutes later. What about Saturday? She asked. Diane still thinks she's exposing infidelity. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Honestly, let her. I looked at him sharply. What? If you confront her privately now, she controls the narrative. If she reveals this publicly, every witness at that table immediately understands the scale of what happened. Rebecca nodded reluctantly. He's right. I hated that they were right. Friday night, I sat beside Oliver's bed long after he fell asleep. Moonlight spilled across his blankets. He slept curled on his side, clutching a stuffed shark Nathan won for him at Navy Pier. I touched his hair gently. Blonde. Soft. Familiar. Mine in every way that mattered. Yet not mine in the one way Diane obsessed over most. Biology. Blood. Genetic legitimacy. I thought about another mother somewhere possibly feeling the same invisible disconnect without understanding why. Maybe her child looked unfamiliar too. Maybe she noticed traits that made no sense. Maybe she carried the same quiet confusion Diane weaponized against me. Saturday morning, Nathan noticed something wrong immediately. "You okay?" he asked while making coffee. I forced a smile. "Just tired." He studied me carefully. "Mom's acting weird about tonight." "How so?" "Too cheerful." He shrugged. "Like she's waiting for something." I looked at my husband. Good man. Steady man. Completely unaware his entire understanding of fatherhood was hours away from detonating. "Nathan," I asked softly, "if you found out something impossible, would you want the truth immediately?" He laughed lightly. "That sounds ominous." "Hypothetically." He walked over and kissed my forehead. "Truth's usually better than lies. Even ugly truth." I nearly cried right there in the kitchen. Saturday evening arrived cold and windy. Diane's house glowed warm against early darkness. Every window lit. Too many cars already lined the driveway. Richard's truck. Melanie's SUV. Cousins. Aunts. Uncles. Audience assembled. Nathan carried a bottle of wine inside while I held Oliver's hand tightly enough, he complained. "Mommy, too hard." I loosened instantly. Diane greeted us at the door wearing navy blue and pearls. Our eyes moved immediately to Oliver. Assessing. Measuring. "There's my handsome boy," she said brightly. The performance had already started. Dinner felt unbearable from the beginning. Every laugh sounded artificial. Every conversation dragged under invisible tension. Diane barely ate. Melanie kept checking her phone. Richard drank more wine than usual. Nathan remained oblivious, discussing work projects with his uncle, while Oliver colored dinosaurs beside the fireplace. I watched everyone the way trauma makes people observe rooms. Hyper-aware, tracking movements, breathing patterns, emotional weather. Finally, halfway through dessert, Diane stood. The room quieted almost instantly. She lifted a manila envelope from the buffet table behind her. Thick, official, prepared. "Before everyone leaves," she said carefully, "there's something Nathan deserves to know." My pulse slowed strangely. Not faster. Slower. Like my body understood impact was unavoidable now. Nathan frowned. "Mom, what is this?" Diane looked directly at me. "I think your wife has been dishonest with you." The room froze completely. Oliver looked up from his coloring pages, confused by the silence. Richard whispered, "Diane, don't." But she continued. "For years, I ignored things that didn't make sense. Oliver's appearance. The inconsistencies." She lifted the envelope slightly. "So I had a DNA analysis performed." Nathan stared at her like he no longer recognized the woman speaking. "You what?" Diane's voice strengthened with momentum. "I needed to protect this family from deception." Melanie looked sick suddenly. Not triumphant. Sick. Nathan stood slowly. "Mum, tell me you didn't secretly test my son. I had every right to know the truth." "You had no right, Nathan," Diane said sharply. "Just read the report." She handed him the envelope with trembling fingers. The room became impossibly quiet. Nathan opened the envelope slowly, pulled out several pages. "Read the first page once." Then again. his face drained of color. "What the hell?" he whispered. Diane exhaled like victory had arrived. "I know this is painful." "No," Nathan interrupted sharply. "No, this says—" He looked up at me confused, terrified. "This says Oliver isn't biologically related to either of us." Diane blinked. "What?" Richard straightened instantly. Melanie covered her mouth. Nathan flipped through pages rapidly. Probability of paternity 0%. Probability of maternity 0%. Diane stared at him. "That's impossible." "Apparently not." Nathan looked at me desperately. "Evelyn, what is this?" Every eye in the room turned toward me. This was the moment Rebecca predicted. The moment Diane's performance collapsed under truth too large for her script. I spoke calmly because shock sometimes creates unnatural steadiness. "I found out Thursday." Diane recoiled. "You knew?" "Yes." Nathan looked wounded instantly. "Why didn't you tell me?" My throat tightened. "Because I needed to verify it first." Richard stood abruptly. "Wait, are you saying Oliver?" His voice broke. I nodded slowly. "I think our son was switched at birth." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The room itself felt stunned. Diane shook her head violently. No, that's ridiculous. Hospitals don't just switch babies." "Sometimes they do," I said quietly. Nathan sat down hard in his chair. "No," he whispered repeatedly like repetition might change reality. No. Oliver looked around confused. "Daddy?" Nathan immediately pulled him close. Instinct. Automatic. Real. "Hey, buddy," he said hoarsely. "It's okay." Diane stared at the report pages in horror now. Not triumph. Horror. "There's another child," she whispered. "Yes." Melanie started crying softly. Richard lowered himself into his chair like his legs no longer worked properly. I took a breath. The report identified a possible maternal match. A woman in Milwaukee named Claire Bennett. Nathan looked up sharply. "You already know who?" "Only a name. Jesus Christ." Diane suddenly looked smaller than I had ever seen her. "I didn't." She swallowed hard. You thought you were exposing me as a cheater," I finished quietly. Nobody defended her. Not even herself. Richard looked at his wife with devastation carved across his face. "You secretly DNA tested our grandson because of his hair color." Diane's voice cracked. "I was trying to protect Nathan." "From what?" Richard exploded suddenly. "His own family." Oliver flinched at the volume. Nathan immediately held him tighter. "Stop," Nathan snapped. Silence crashed down again. Then Oliver asked the question that shattered everyone completely. "Mommy, am I still your kid?" I felt my heart physically break. I crossed the room instantly and knelt beside him. "Always," I whispered fiercely. "Always." He touched my face with small warm hands. "Promise." Tears finally spilled down my cheeks. "I promise with everything I have." Nathan buried his face briefly against Oliver's hair. Richard turned away, wiping his eyes. Even Melanie sobbed openly now. Diane stood frozen beside the dining table, still holding the remains of the life she thought she understood. But the worst part had not even arrived yet. Because 20 minutes later, Daniel Price called my phone. I stepped into the hallway to answer. "We found them," he said immediately. "The other family." My knees nearly gave out. "What?" "The hospital confirmed a probable identification error involving 2 births the same night. Claire Bennett's son appears biologically connected to you and Nathan." I pressed a hand against the wall. "Do they know?" "Not yet." "Oh, God." Daniel's voice softened. Evelyn, there's something else. What? Their son has leukemia. Everything inside me stopped. What? Diagnosed 8 months ago. They've been struggling to find compatible family donors for treatment support. That's partly why Claire submitted DNA testing. I slid slowly down the hallway wall onto the floor. Somewhere inside the dining room, family voices blurred into distant noise. Leukemia. Our biological child. Sick. Evelyn? Daniel said gently. Are you there? I could barely breathe. Yes. The Bennetts want to meet. Sunday morning. Nathan and I drove to Milwaukee in near silence while Oliver stayed with my mother. Snow covered the interstate in dirty frozen lines. Neither of us slept more than 2 hours. Trauma has strange timing. Sometimes your brain protects you by delaying emotional collapse until movement becomes unavoidable. Nathan drove with both hands locked tightly on the steering wheel. Around Kenosha, he finally spoke. Do you think he looks like us? I stared out the window at endless grey sky. I don't know. What if he hates us? That broke me slightly because the question sounded so childlike. He's 5, I whispered. I don't think children work like that. Nathan nodded but kept gripping the wheel too tightly. The Bennetts lived in a modest blue house outside Milwaukee, with bicycles in the yard, and Christmas lights still hanging from the gutters despite February ending weeks earlier. Claire opened the front door before we even knocked. She looked exhausted. Thin. Dark circles beneath swollen eyes. But the second I saw her face, something inside me lurched painfully. She looked like Oliver. Same eyes. Same cheekbones. Same uncertain expression when nervous. Claire stared at me exactly the same way. Hi, she whispered. Nathan stood beside me, unable to speak. A man appeared behind Claire, carrying a little boy in his arms. And the world tilted sideways. The child had Nathan's eyes. Exactly Nathan's eyes. Same dark hair. Same jawline. Same tiny crease beside his mouth when confused. My biological son looked at me from a stranger's arms. This is Mason, Claire said softly. Mason buried his face against the man's shoulder shyly. And this is my husband, Luke. None of us knew what to say. How could we? There are no rehearsed social scripts for meeting the family accidentally raising your child. Eventually Claire invited us inside. The living room smelled faintly like medicine and coffee. Hospital paperwork covered the dining table. Nathan crouched carefully in front of Mason. Hey, buddy, he said gently. Mason studied him with enormous cautious eyes. Mum says you're my other dad. Nathan inhaled sharply. Something like that. Mason considered this seriously. Okay. Children adapt faster than adults because they have fewer rigid definitions of reality. Claire made tea nobody drank. Luke explained Mason's treatment plan. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Aggressive but treatable. Months of chemotherapy already completed. More ahead. When doctors started asking about family donor matches, Claire said quietly. Nothing made sense genetically. She looked at me. I thought maybe I'd cheated on Luke somehow and forgotten reality. The dark humor cracked briefly into tears. I moved instinctively beside her on the couch. 2 mothers connected by impossible grief. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I am too. Nathan spent nearly an hour building Lego towers with Mason on the carpet. Watching them together physically hurt. Same laugh. Same concentration face. Same habit of biting the inside of the cheek while thinking. Biology sat there undeniable and heartbreaking. But every time my phone buzzed with photos from my mother showing Oliver eating pancakes or playing with trains, my chest ached differently. Because my real son was not the child across the room. And yet he absolutely was. Both things existed simultaneously. That realization nearly destroyed me. Over the next month, our lives transformed into something impossible to explain to outsiders. Hospital lawyers got involved. DNA confirmations. Birth records. Shift reports from 31 exhausted maternity staff members working during a severe storm system the night we delivered. Eventually, investigators found the error. 2 newborn boys placed temporarily in adjacent warming stations during a power fluctuation caused by lightning damage. Incorrect identification bracelets attached during emergency transfer confusion. 1 mistake. 5 years of consequences. The media eventually learned portions of the story despite confidentiality efforts. Midwest baby swap case appeared online beside photos we never approved. Strangers debated our lives like television drama. Some people insisted children should immediately return to biological families. Others argued emotional bonds mattered more than DNA. I stopped reading comments after 3 days because humanity becomes monstrous when discussing pain from safe distances. Diane called repeatedly during that first month. I ignored every call. Nathan answered twice. Both conversations ended badly. How could you do this? He shouted during one argument while pacing our kitchen. How could you secretly test my child over hair color? I heard Diane crying through the speakerphone. I made a mistake. No, Nathan snapped. The hospital made a mistake. You made a choice. Richard visited often without Diane. He brought groceries sometimes. Quiet support. One evening after Oliver fell asleep, Richard sat at our kitchen table staring into coffee. She hasn't forgiven herself, he said softly. I looked at him tiredly. That's not really my responsibility right now. I know. He rubbed his hands together slowly. For what it's worth, I never doubted Oliver belonged to this family. I believed him. Richard understood something Diane never did. Love creates family far more reliably than blood does. Claire and I started talking daily. At first about logistics, medical appointments, therapy recommendations, legal processes, but eventually about motherhood itself. She told me Mason hated peas and loved sharks. I told her Oliver still crawled into our bed during thunderstorms. We traded stories carefully like people handling explosives. Sometimes we cried together. Sometimes we laughed unexpectedly. Trauma bonds people strangely. One afternoon, 6 weeks after the dinner, the 4 of us took both boys to a children's museum in Chicago. First meeting. Neutral territory. I nearly vomited from anxiety beforehand. How do you introduce 2 children to a reality adults barely comprehend? But kids operate differently. Oliver stared at Mason for 30 seconds before announcing, "We kinda look alike." Mason nodded seriously. Yeah. Then they spent 2 hours building foam block castles together like none of this was unusual. At one point, Oliver grabbed my hand with one hand and Claire's with the other, while dragging us toward a dinosaur exhibit. The symbolism nearly killed me. That evening after the museum closed, Nathan and Luke stood watching the boys race across an empty parking lot chasing each other through drifting snowflakes. Do you ever feel angry at them? Luke asked quietly. Nathan considered it. No. Me neither. They stood silently for a moment. Then Nathan admitted something devastating. I'm terrified he'll stop loving me someday when he understands. Luke looked toward Oliver laughing beside Mason under streetlights. Kids know who raised them, he said softly. That matters. The legal battle against the hospital settled privately 9 months later. None of us cared much about money. The real damage could never be financially repaired anyway. What mattered more was building a future from ruins none of us chose. We made a decision many outsiders considered strange. Neither family switched children permanently. Instead, we built something new. Shared birthdays. Shared holidays occasionally. Frequent visits. Open honesty from the beginning. Oliver and Mason would grow up knowing exactly who they were and how deeply they were loved by all of us. Some therapists warned the arrangement might become emotionally complicated. They were right. It was complicated. But love usually is. Diane saw Oliver again 3 months after the dinner. Supervised visit. She looked terrified standing on our porch holding a small wrapped gift. Oliver ran to her instantly because children often forgive faster than adults deserve. "Grandma!" he shouted happily. Diane collapsed into tears before she even hugged him. Later, while Oliver played in the yard with Nathan, Diane sat across from me at the kitchen table, twisting a paper napkin apart. "I need you to know," she whispered. "I truly believed I was protecting my son." I looked at her for a long time. "The problem is that you believed blood mattered more than love." Diane cried silently. "I know that now." "Do you?" She nodded slowly. "When that test said Oliver wasn't biologically related to Nathan, my first feeling wasn't relief. It was terror." Her voice cracked. "Because suddenly I realized losing him would destroy us anyway." For the first time since meeting Diane Whitmore 8 years earlier, I saw complete honesty in her face. Raw, unprotected, human, not manipulation, not performance, just regret. "I don't know what forgiveness looks like yet," I admitted quietly. "But I'm trying." She nodded through tears. "That's more kindness than I deserve." Richard eventually moved back into their bedroom after temporarily sleeping downstairs for almost 2 months. Nathan and Diane attended family counseling together. Melanie deleted years of passive-aggressive social media posts and apologized sincerely one rainy afternoon over coffee. "Mum taught me to treat family like genetics instead of relationships," she said quietly. "I didn't even realize it until all this happened." The boys turned 6 together in April. Shared birthday party at a lakeside park halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. Oliver wanted dinosaur cupcakes. Mason wanted sharks. We did both. At one point during the party, I looked across the grass and saw something that would have destroyed me months earlier, but somehow healed me instead. Nathan teaching Mason how to throw a baseball while Luke pushed Oliver on swings nearby. 2 fathers loving 2 boys regardless of DNA confusion or legal definitions or catastrophic mistakes. Just love. Simple. Real. Necessary. Claire stood beside me watching the same scene. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Diane never ordered the test?" she asked softly. "I did think about that sometimes. Constantly, actually." Mason's leukemia treatment depended partly on discovering biological compatibility. Without the DNA results, doctors might never have identified Nathan as a potential donor match. Without the match, treatment options would have narrowed dangerously. A cruel act rooted in suspicion accidentally saved a child's life. The irony felt almost too large to hold. "All the time," I admitted. Claire looked toward the boys. "Maybe terrible people still accidentally open the right door sometimes." I almost laughed. Diane would hate being called terrible. Was it inaccurate? I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said honestly. "But I think she's trying very hard not to stay that person forever." Mason's leukemia entered remission 11 months later. Nathan cried harder hearing that news than I had seen him cry during our entire marriage combined. Richard hugged him in the hospital hallway, while Diane stood nearby openly sobbing. Families are strange structures. Fragile. Flexible. Sometimes broken completely before rebuilt differently. 2 years have passed now since the dinner. Oliver knows he grew in another mommy's tummy, but grew up in mine. Mason explains it to classmates by saying he has bonus parents. Children simplify what adults complicate. Nathan and Luke became close friends somehow. Claire and I text almost daily. Diane stopped dyeing her hair after everything happened. Silver streaks show through now. Sometimes in sunlight, you can still catch traces of pale blonde underneath. The irony isn't lost on her anymore. Last Thanksgiving, she pulled me aside while everyone cleaned dishes. I spent years believing family was about proving who belonged, she said quietly. Turns out family is who stays when everything falls apart. I looked toward the living room where Oliver and Mason slept side by side under blankets after exhausting themselves playing. Nathan sat nearby assembling a toy spaceship Richard bought them. Luke and Claire argued playfully over pie recipes in the kitchen. Chaos. Imperfect. Real. Yeah, I said softly. Turns out, the manila envelope still exists. I kept it. Not because I enjoy remembering that night, but because it reminds me how quickly certainty becomes destruction. Diane wanted that envelope to expose betrayal. Instead, it exposed how little any of us actually understood about blood, love, or belonging. Here is what I know now. Biology matters. It does. But it is not the strongest force inside a family. Love is. Choices. Showing up every day is. The people who raise you through fevers and nightmares and ordinary Tuesdays become part of your soul in ways DNA alone never can. And sometimes the truth arrives through terrible circumstances, because life is messy and cruel and strangely merciful all at once. That is my story. A DNA test, a hospital mistake, and 2 little boys who taught 4 broken adults what family really means. If this reminded you to trust love more than fear, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.